I sat in a room for several hours just waiting. And
Several
then
hours?
they said, "Hey, take a seat." And she said, "Your blood test came back positive for HIV." The doctor explained that HIV is a manageable chronic illness. And while it's not life threatening, you can no longer be in the military.
Family, it's your favorite queer radio personality, Anna DeShawn, here with another exclusive interview for our Queer News podcast. If you've been listening to the podcast, then you know I reported about a story that really blew me away. Okay, I got the email from Lambda Legal talking about they won this historic case, and I began to read about how the Department of Defense was denying folks living with HIV the opportunity to serve in our military. And I was just blown away. I was like, how is this still happening? How is this still a thing? Today, I get to talk with one of the plaintiffs of this case that was brought by Lambda Legal and their allies and associates. And I'm excited to talk to Isaiah about what all this has meant. So, Isaiah, welcome to the Queer News Podcast.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I appreciate you coming on and being down to share more of your story out here in the world with all of us. To get started, I think it's cool if we just get started by you telling us a little bit about yourself. So tell us, who is Isaiah?
I'm originally from Houston, Texas, but I've grown primarily up in Georgia. And I come from a family of a military service. That's where it all started. Really, I would say just service in general. At least that's how my story's kind of evolved. I enlisted at 17 into the National Guard. I went to Georgia Military College. And while there, my mentors and coaches and professors encouraged me to apply to West Point. And that was really always my goal. And I saw that and decided to pursue that. I applied to West Point and was accepted into the preparatory program.
After you got into the preparatory program, tell us what happened next.
Yeah, so because I was enlisted, it gets complicated, but because I was enlisted at the prep school, I had to be discharged from the National Guard and re-enlist. And so that required that I go through a standardized medical procedure where I was diagnosed with HIV. And I was brought in, they diagnosed me, and in the same conversation said that, hey, the policy doesn't allow for you to stay here, so go ahead and get ready to pack your bags, and we're going to send you home.
So when I was reading that, the first thing that popped in my mind was, that's one hell of a way to find out that you're living with HIV. Can you take us back to that moment?
Yeah, it was quite the moment. That day was the end of a series of training events, and so it was like this culminating training event. I remember very early in the morning, I was with my squad. We were going to go and complete a series of events, and you do them collectively. And at West Point, it's led by fellow cadets. So an upperclassman had come up to me and said, "Hey, you're not going to participate in the event today. You have a doctor's appointment." Which, like, it isn't unusual to have a doctor's appointment, but it was unusual to say that you're not going to participate in this major training event. You're just going to sit here and wait. And I gave it, I was, no, like, the doctor's appointment can wait. And then a senior enlisted personnel had come in and said, "No, you're not. Come with me." And then we went through this kind of corridor hallways. I sat in a room for several hours just waiting.
Several hours?
Yeah, it was probably a couple, probably 2 to 3. And then a senior ranking officer came in and brought me back. I went into the commandant's office, and there waiting for me was a nurse and the director of the hospital at West Point.
Wow.
And they said, "Hey, take a seat," and said, "Do you remember going and getting a blood test when you came here?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Your blood test came back positive for HIV." And it it was just a moment. I broke down. I told her I needed a moment, and it was, yeah, I stepped out. It was really emotional, obviously, because I knew the policy, or maybe I assumed the policy. So I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I didn't know much about HIV at the time. I was like, my first question was like, oh, am I going to die? What's going to happen? And then I was like, wait, can I stay in the military? And so there was a lot. And the doctor, as gracefully as she could be, explained that HIV is a manageable chronic illness. And while it's not life threatening, you can no longer be in the military.
That is a lot, Isaiah. That's a lot, especially because you've wanted to serve in the military really for your whole life. I know you
Yeah.
mentioned that your family is of military service and your mother, but this has always been a lifelong dream. And for it to culminate in this moment where you find out life changing information on this side, and then on the
Yeah.
other side, you also find out that maybe my dreams cannot be achieved. That's a lot for anybody to take in at one time. And I'm sure things were running through your mind, all these thoughts, maybe dreams deferred. How do you get from that moment to connecting with Lambda Legal and saying, I'm okay with putting my name on this lawsuit and I want to take on this fight?
When I looked up the policy, it was interesting. When I was being discharged from the military, the policy at the time said that you can be in the military with HIV if you received your diagnosis during your service. So if you joined the military, you didn't have HIV, you obtained it at some point during your service, they weren't going to kick you out. The policy barred that from happening. And so because I was enlisted in the National Guard, I just felt like they were interpreting the policy wrong. And I just started researching. And then I also thought, how can you say to somebody, oh, this is a manageable chronic illness that you can take one pill a day for the rest of your life, but you got to get out. I thought that was insane.
I just want you to know it is. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I Googled HIV discrimination and found Lambda Legal, and they have a help desk. And I called the help desk, and an attorney called me within 24 hours. And I'm not going to get into the legal strategy because that was well before we filed our lawsuit. But that's when I first came into contact with Lambda, and they were litigating a case for Nick Harrison.
Got it. So you literally were like, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
I don't think you're interpreting this policy correctly.
Yeah.
I'm Googling, I find Lambda Legal, and it was truly like a cold call situation.
Yeah.
And then a lawyer reached back out to you.
Yeah, I did a lot of research on a lot of different lawyers. Just Lambda Legal seemed like they have a track record of winning one and representing people who are HIV positive and LGBTQ people.
Absolutely. A long history of it,
Yeah.
okay? And coming out with
Yes.
the wins on the other side.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so you get connected with Lambda. We won't get into the strategy of it all. But this case also, you're being represented, and also two folks who are choosing to remain anonymous are being represented in this case. But your name is on the roll. What
Yeah.
type of courage does that take? What made you decide to say, I want my name on the roll for this?
I think part of that is the history of cases before me. I mentioned Nick Harrison earlier. He was an active duty soldier. The military paid for him to go to law school, and they denied him the ability to commission because during his medical process, he was diagnosed with HIV. And Lambda Legal represented him and won his case. I remember reading his case and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I can't imagine like putting your name and putting all of that out there. But then after several conversations with Lambda, when they asked if I was ready to file the lawsuit, I was at that point, I had gained some courage, and I don't know, maybe it's part of just how I was raised. I was like, yeah, I want them to know who I am. Like, they're going to know what happened. And so I think part of that courage comes from previous plaintiffs and just the champions that I stand on their shoulders, I feel like. And part of that's coming from my upbringing. It's funny, a lot of people will say like describe it the way you just did, with a lot of courage. And I feel like it's just me playing my part or doing the, I felt like that was just the best choice in front of me at the time. That doesn't take anything away from my fellow anonymous co-plaintiffs. Like, everybody is in their space, and they have to make the decision that's best for them with kind of the cards that they have, the hand that they're playing with. I don't want to take away credit from them. I feel like in a lot of ways, being a named plaintiff, I've been the face of the lawsuit in a lot of ways, but this is way more than just about me. It's every person who's living with HIV is what this case is about.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said all of what you just said. I think it's really important because I
Yeah,
also think we all can show up differently based upon our circumstances and based upon our
100%.
privilege and based
Yeah,
upon our social location. Like, all these things are determinants for how we can show up in the world. And
exactly.
you and where you are today, you had and have the ability to put your name on the roll. And for that, many people will be grateful. I'm sure of it. Now, I want to get this quote correct because you said it. You said, a dream delayed is better than a dream denied. Now, it took 2 years for you all to get this verdict. Is that still how you feel today?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it took us 2 years to get this verdict. The discharge occurred. I couldn't even tell you how long ago now. I think 6 years ago, maybe now. And yeah, I do feel that way. I think it's an amazing opportunity, and I've doubled down on my commitment to rejoin the military. There are a couple different paths ahead of us, and we're going to work that out. But I do absolutely feel that way.
And so that leads us to my next question, which is, what's next for you? So is the next thing to rejoin the military?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to find a path. My goal is to commission, and yeah, I'm just going to double down on my commitment to serve.
And so, Isaiah, before we end the interview, I'm so curious. Have you found the support that you need to get through this? It has taken 2 years. It's been 6 years since you've been discharged, right? You've been living a lot of life in between that time and now. Have you gotten the support you need to get through?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a very close group of people. I have my partner Sebastian. We've been together for 4 years. I have really small group of core friends that I lean on that have just been there every step of the way.
I love to hear that. It's not easy being queer out here in the world. It's not easy being a queer person of color out here in the world. Chile, you are also a person living with HIV who
Mm,
also is looking to serve in the military, who's just gone through a very public case and a historic
yeah.
one at that. So it takes a lot of courage to be you out here in the world today, given the political climate. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much for having me on, and it wouldn't be possible without people like you.
I just do my part the way you said we do. We all are doing a service in one way or another. This is the way I do service, and how I can give back to the community. And I'll take this moment to say thank you to all who have chosen to serve. Chile, it ain't my calling, okay? But I am grateful that someone somewhere is taking on the call to serve in the military. So, Isaiah, thank you for joining us. And family, this is what we do right here on E3 Radio, because we are Queer News Done Right.